Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his military today to keep fighting Hezbollah with, quote, full force. He said this before leaving for New York to head to the UN General Assembly, where the annual gathering of world leaders is underway. The U.S., Europe, and several Arab nations called for a 21-day ceasefire on Wednesday. Neither Israel nor Hezbollah have responded to this call to lay down their arms.
The sharp escalation of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah has sounded alarms across the globe, with many people wondering if this could spark an even wider conflict. Now, there has, of course, been a lower level of attacks between Hezbollah and Israel across the southern border of Lebanon since the war in Gaza erupted nearly a year ago. But violence flared anew last week after Israel set off a high-tech attack. Israel in some fashion infiltrated or was able to interfere with the manufacture of pagers bound for Hezbollah and rigged them to explode simultaneously. The trigger was an alleged message by a Hezbollah commander, and when people with those pagers responded, more than 400 of the devices exploded across Lebanon, killing and maiming many hundreds of people. Since then, the attacks have escalated.
So can these two nations be pulled back? What is happening with Gaza and Israel as it recedes from the front pages? And is this the beginning of a world war? Here to unpack all of it is former diplomat Aaron David Miller, who is now with the Carnegie Endowment for Peace. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So since last we've had you on the show, the situation seems to have gotten much more tense with this pager attack on Hezbollah, wounding many fighters for Hezbollah and also innocent bystanders. A very dramatic thing to have done. Where are we right now in terms of the U.S.'s role in getting anyone to stand down?
I think I'd offer a broad observation about what I consider to be the big picture and why the lift for the United States is so difficult. What you're witnessing and what we've witnessed even before October 7th, but the clarity of it is coming into greater view, tragically. We have three wars of attrition going on. One between Israel, Hamas in Gaza and in the West Bank. One between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has recently escalated, largely as a result, I think, of changing Israeli tactics and strategy. And then a third war of attrition, not between Israel and two non-state actors, but between Israel and Iran. These wars of attrition, I'll be very clear here, are not going to be resolved by what I would call transformative diplomacy. There are no stable end states to any of them right now. The best you can do is to either try to contain and manage them through deterrence on one hand, or perhaps with enough skill and luck and determination, what I would describe to you as transactional diplomacy, not transformational diplomacy, not something that's going to end the conflict between Israel, Hamas, or Israel and Palestinians, not a transformative ending to securing Israel's northern border and finalizing in some diplomatic agreement its relationship or its confrontation with Hezbollah, and certainly not between the interstate war of attrition between Israel and Iran. The best you can do is what I would describe to you as transactional diplomacy. That would be a ceasefire in Gaza. That would be some American diplomacy in the north, along the lines of what the United Nations Security Council declared in Resolution 1701, following the last major engagement between Israel and Hezbollah. But we need to be extremely sober and very realistic about what the United States, or the international community for that matter, will be able to achieve in any of these three arenas.
But even given the point about the more modest transactional kind of diplomacy that you want, I mean, the United States plainly has not been able to achieve a ceasefire even in Gaza, which was the first pillar of that you suggested. And we know the Israeli government has a number of extremely hard right members, Itamar Ben-Gvir being perhaps the most prominent. So how is even that element of transactional diplomacy to be achieved or advanced?
Correct. And I think you've simply identified the problem. Let's take Gaza first. you've got two decision makers, Yahya Sinwar and Benjamin Netanyahu, whose view of this conflict, certainly on the part of Yahya Sinwar, ensconced somewhere below Khan Yunis or Rafah, or maybe even in Sinai in some tunnel, surrounded by what hostages remain, who sees no urgency whatsoever. None. You have an Israeli prime minister, on the other hand, whose organizing principle of his world is to maintain himself in power, doesn't want a regional war, but is very happy with what he would consider controlled escalation. And he's got an extremely difficult coalition of 64 seats, two radical extremist ministers who are threatened to bolt should he sign any deal. Itamar Ben-Gvir said today, that Israelis sign an agreement with Hezbollah for anything other than a long-term capitulation on Hezbollah's part, that he'd leave the government. So the two principal decision makers in this existential or near existential, with respect to prime minister's political career, are simply don't have the urgency in making this decision. And frankly, we can discuss this issue in length. Over the course of the last year, the leverage that the U.S. may exercise on paper in order to press, I think it has almost no leverage with Hamas on the Israelis. They've chosen for any number of reasons not to use. So you're quite correct. Even what I refer to as the transactional approach is not paying off.
So at what point then does the U.S. administration change tactics? Do we say, the Biden administration, or if it's about to be a Kamala administration or a Trump administration, say, okay, we want some kind of lasting peace between these two sides. That's what's in our interest. But neither side is interested in that because Netanyahu wants to eliminate Hamas, or at least wants Yahya Sinwar not in power anymore, and Sinwar doesn't agree to that. So the gulf between them is unbridgeable. Why shouldn't we just say, all right, we're going to disentangle ourselves then. Good luck. Have fun. Enjoy your little war. We want nothing to do with it.
Right. Well, I don't think, frankly, I worked for half a dozen administrations, Republicans and Democrats, and the temptation to extricate, to basically say, forget it, none of you are interested in this, we're walking away. Politically, it's not acceptable. Morally, it's not acceptable. And on the other hand, if there's no extrication, and I would argue, I happen to be a fan of the Eagles and their iconic song Hotel California, in which they say you can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. October 7 is exactly a demonstration of that fact. So extrication is not an option, and I would argue transformation is not an option. We can't transform this region. Look at 20 years that we spent in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the standard for victory was never could we win, but when could we leave? The Middle East is a region, sadly, tragically, where American ideas on war-making and peacemaking will often go to die. You're describing, in your question, the dilemma, the conundrum that have faced successive administrations, regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republicans. Walking away is not an option. So, and I also address head on the issue of leverage. We have tremendous leverage over the Israelis. The administration, any administration, could have restricted or conditioned U.S. military assistance to Israel. We could have introduced our own UN Security Council resolution, critical, or voted for someone else's. We could have followed the lead of 140 other countries, most recently the Irish, the Norwegians, and the Spanish, and unilaterally recognized Palestinian statehood. Or we could have abandoned the whole notion of a negotiation between Israel and Hamas and just joined the international community and basically said, we want a cessation of all hostilities, or else. Well, we've chosen not to do that. And the more global reason we have it is because I cannot identify for you, maybe you can, but I can't, a single example of when the United States used sustained and serious pressure against a friend, a partner, or an ally. These three categories of nations that we don't consider adversaries or enemies or even frenemies. I can't think of an example. We don't leverage our friends. And if we don't leverage our friends, French, the British, the Canadians, the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Australians, an American president, I've watched this up close and personal, an American president is not going to war with an Israeli prime minister given the political resonance of the Israel issue, and certainly not 45 days before one of the most consequential elections, perhaps, in modern American history. So you're quite right. And this puts the United States and its interests in a very difficult position. The Middle East is littered with the remains of great powers who wrongly believed they could impose their will, their aspirations, their schemes, their dreams, even their best of intentions on smaller powers.
It is a fascinating question. There are so many strands to it that you have outlined there. Wish we had more time to get into it, but the clock is once again against us. So, Aaron David Miller, thanks for joining us, and hope to see you again soon on Rising.
Thank you. Great questions. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.